Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Laszlo Montgomery, now starting my 16th year, bringing you all these exciting episodes of the China History Podcast. So, quite a few of you have reached out to me asking, what's up? I was so regular for all these years, new episodes every couple of weeks, and now, during the second half of 2025, so stingy with the new material. Well, actually, in between trips to Cambodia, I've been cranking out a lot of new episodes for a new series that's coming to you around Chinese New Year 2026. That'll be February 17th, Wu Zetian's birthday. All of that new stuff has been up on Patreon and CHP Premium. If you're feeling any FOMO, you can consider that a nuclear option. This one I have for you today, well, I'll admit, I completely forgot about it. It came out on Patreon like 6 months ago in June. I just woke up, someone emailed me this morning, and was wondering if I'm okay and if I'm still posting CHP episodes. Now, aside from the glaucoma and macular degeneration I just found out about yesterday, I'm doing great. And this forgotten episode will serve as proof of life. It's from 6 months ago, but as far as I've been able to tell, nothing new has surfaced regarding this story, so it's still green. Back in February, I featured author and master jade carver Andrew Shaw onto the CHP to talk about his book, Spoil, which looked at the history of looted treasures and the stories behind them. This time I wanted to dig a little deeper into only one of the incidents that Andrew Shaw mentioned. Graves and grave robbing go hand in hand. We're familiar with so many stories about these tombs being built and plundered, and in some cases, even the remains of former royals or aristocrats being desecrated. So I feel safe in saying that robbing tombs is nothing new, nor is it exclusive to China. Herodotus, the Sima Qian of Western Civ, when he saw the Great Pyramid of Giza in the 5th century BC, during China's Warring States period, that structure had already been picked clean, from the gold, the jewels, right down to the casing stones. Since the earliest days, just like I have to always try to find places to hide things so my cats don't get it, royalty had the same problem. The guys who worked for the pharaohs, emperors, and kings throughout the millennia always tried in vain to outsmart the grave robbers. Tombs like Ma Wangdui in Changsha, Sanxingdui in Chengdu, or Tutankhamun in Egypt. There's not many of those that made it through the ages into our modern times unmolested. Those are the exceptions. That's what makes our story today sort of interesting. The Eastern tombs, the Qing Dongling, everybody knew where they were. They weren't hidden away. And for any foreign tourist, going back to the CTS days in the 1970s, and to locals and expats as well, these Eastern tombs are old hat and still today remain a well-known sight on the Beijing tourist map. But for everyone else who knows not of their existence or who had never heard of the warlord Sun Dianying, this one may be of interest to you. The imperial tombs of the emperors were usually found around the ancient capitals of Chang'an and Luoyang. Qin Shi Huang's famous mausoleum with its terracotta warriors is one example. Same goes with the 19 Tang imperial tombs. Tomb raiders have engaged in this trade for as long as nobles and royals have been burying themselves with treasure. Even Cao Cao participated in the pastime with the tomb of Liu Wu, the Prince of Liang. His eternal slumber was interrupted on Cao Cao's orders. Uniting a nation and conquering one's rivals was a very costly business. There's never been a shortage of people throughout history lacking in human decency who wouldn't think twice about robbing some tomb. According to the record of the Three Kingdoms, Cao Cao had appointed a Mo Jin Xiaowei, or gold-seeking captain, to lead the efforts of searching for buried treasure to fund his military campaigns. And maybe because of this, Cao Cao himself was very careful and put a lot of thought into the location and construction of his final resting place. When they found Cao Cao's tomb? Well, He died in 220, and it took 1,788 years till December 2008 before they came across it in Anyang, Henan province. That was also where the Shang oracle bones were unearthed at the ruins of Yin, the Yinshu. When Cao Cao's tomb was discovered, there was quite a heated debate among scholars concerning the human remains inside this tomb. Many questioned whether or not the primary inhabitant of this tomb was the Cao Cao. Well, I went down that rabbit hole and read that the matter was settled in 2018, with most experts agreeing that the discovery was Cao Cao's tomb. Some insist this wasn't the actual final resting place of, well, not only this towering figure in all of Chinese history, but also a biggie from the gaming world too. Koei's Romance of the Three Kingdoms and Dynasty Warriors, plus appearances in a bunch of other games. Cao Cao in popular culture, he's some serious stuff. Grave robbing is usually a secretive endeavor, but not in the case of the infamous Wen Tao. His example kind of stands out. He was a journeyman military leader who thrived on the chaos of the final years of the Tang Dynasty, ultimately becoming a military governor of Zhu Wen's later Liang Dynasty, 907 to 923. Now, most of you recall Zhu Wen, the former Tang Dynasty military governor who murdered the last two Tang emperors and fired the starting gun of the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms era, reigning as the founding Emperor Wu of Liang. According to the New History of the 5 Dynasties, compiled in the Northern Song, Wen Tao, utilizing 10th century excavation technologies, had thousands of soldiers tunnel into the mountains where the tombs were located. There were 19 Tang imperial tombs. Wen Tao, he managed to desecrate 18 of them. Like the kamikaze winds that spared Japan from the Mongol invaders in 1274 and 1281, it was inclement weather that spared the tomb of China's only empress to rule in her own name, Wu Zetian, but all the other tombs got hit. Just from Emperor Taizong's Jiaoling alone, the value of the treasures seized by Wen Tao were incalculable. And what he pulled out of these graves amounted to what had to be one of the greatest losses of Chinese cultural relics, going back to the beginning. Some might argue that if it hadn't have been for Wen Tao, someone else would have come along later on and done the deed. Probably so, given the track record throughout Chinese history. As one well-worn legend goes, per Emperor Taizong's personal request, an actual copy of Wang Xizhi's preface to the Orchid Pavilion collection, the Lantingji Xu, had been placed inside the tomb along with this deceased Tang Dynasty co-founding emperor. When Wen Tao cast his eyes on this gold standard of Chinese calligraphy, he had no clue to its value. As the legend goes, he discarded the priceless calligraphy scroll of Wang Xizhi and kept the decorated silken box it was placed in. Surrounding Taizong's Jiaoling tomb are some 200 other royals and top officials who served him in life. These are known as satellite tombs, or peizang mu. Among the occupants is Taizong's saintly Empress Jiangsun, covered in a past CHP episode, number 286, if you're having trouble falling asleep one night. After such an audacious act, Wen Tao acquired a degree of infamy for what he gone and did, and later on he was held accountable for his heinous crime and ended up being executed in 928. As for the Northern Song Dynasty mausolea, they're located in a place called Gongyi, halfway between Zhengzhou and Luoyang, far to the west of the northern Song capital of Kaifeng. The site is known as the Seven Song Tombs, the Songqi Ling. They all got cleaned out by the puppet emperor who the Jurchen Jin rulers installed in Kaifeng after conquering the dynasty in the north. As for the southern Song emperors, they're around Shaoxing. The Liao and Yuan dynasty tombs are in Inner Mongolia, as are those of the Jurchen Jin. As we all know, the
13 tombs of the Ming emperors, the Shisanling. Those are 26 miles northwest of Beijing. I first got to see those in the summer of 1980. Wan Li's tomb is called the Dingling, and to this day it's the only Ming tomb that's been excavated. And because the attempt to excavate the tomb was done without the knowledge and expertise archaeologists of today have, most of the artifacts succumb to the ravages of being exposed to the elements. And then we get to the subject of today's episode, the tombs of the Qing emperors, Shunzhi to Guangxu. The Qing necropolises, they were constructed over a period of about 200 years at 2 locations in Hebei province, not too far from the imperial capital of Beijing. The eastern tombs were built at a place called Malanyu, just to the west of Zunhua, about 75 miles northwest of the capital. And the western tombs are found in Yi County, around 85 miles southwest of Beijing. And you could be sure the most accurate geomancers in all the empire put the entirety of their skill set to use to analyze the feng shui and, along with the emperor, determine the optimal location to build the mausoleums, not only for the emperors, but their empresses, family, and concubines as well. At both sites, there are mountains and rivers for the geomancer to bring harmony to the emperor's final resting place, and everything was carefully aligned according to nature's way. Like with all imperial tombs, the Qing emperor's tombs are all meticulously built along a central axis containing spiritways, stone statuary, ceremonial structures, priceless treasures, and underground chambers for the royal remains and treasures he wanted to enjoy in the afterlife and to perform all the necessary rituals. As for the western Qing tombs, the Qing Xiling, they were built during the reign of Yongzheng, son of Kangxi. Yongzheng, in preparing his mausoleum, opted to break with tradition by choosing a site that was separate from his father, the Kangxi emperor. He began the tradition that called for the deceased emperor to henceforth be placed in the same compound as his grandfather, and Emperor Qianlong officially called for alternating burials between the eastern and western sites. Now, maybe this was done for political reasons, maybe for reasons of superstition, but the Tailing, or the Tai Mausoleum, was where the hard-working and thrifty Yongzheng emperor had his tomb built. The western tombs are smaller in total area than the eastern tombs, and tourists to the western tombs can mingle with the spirits of not only Yongzheng, but Jiaqing, Daoguang, and Guangxu. In all civilizations, not just in China, some kings and rulers were more ostentatious and extravagant than others, and those who took profligacy to a certain level found their final resting places that they had tried to hide like a squirrel hides nuts, looted and denuded of all valuables and treasures. The more austere emperors, like Yongzheng and Kangxi, they ended up being spared. At these eastern Qing tombs are the silent sanctuaries of Shunzhi, Kangxi, Qianlong, Xianfeng, and Tongzhi emperors, as well as their empresses. Also residing at the Qing eastern tombs were the dowager empresses Cixi and Ci'an. Every tomb of nearly every emperor going back to Qin Shi Huang had a name. Shunzhi's tomb was called the Xiaoling. You keep hearing that word ling. Well, that's the Chinese word for a tomb. So everything is some word followed by the character ling. Shunzhi was Kangxi's father, so you could be sure the son took great care to see that this first Qing emperor to reside in Beijing's final resting place was both well-appointed and exact in its funerary wear, detail, and feng shui. But not in its opulence. Because Shunzhi's mausoleum was the first of the Qing tombs, it kind of became a benchmark for later tombs of the Qing emperors. The Xiaoling had what was one of the most distinguishing characteristics of Qing imperial tombs: a sacred way, or Shen Tao, leading to a main hall where the memorial rites were conducted, and the tomb contained an underground palace where the sarcophagi of the Shunzhi Emperor and his Empress Xiaoxian were located. Emperor Shunzhi's tomb broke with the past as far as its design went. It introduced a kind of blueprint that would be replicated in subsequent constructions. They were all built with a spirit road, a place for ceremonies, and a kitchen and storage area for rituals. The Jingling was the name of Emperor Kangxi's tomb. Now, this tomb was the first to invite an emperor's concubine to share his final resting place. And he also switched from cremation to burial and had a wait-for-me policy for the empresses, keeping the stone gate open until their passing. After the death of his empress, Xiao Chengren, a spot close to Kangxi was selected. And the building started in 1676, and by 1681, they had his magnificent mausoleum all ready. Now, Qianlong's Yuling is a grand creation that took 9 years to build, from 1743 to 1752. Now, more about this grand mausoleum in a bit. The Dingling is where they deposited the poor old Xianfeng emperor. This one also took 7 years and millions of taels of silver to complete. When Xianfeng passed away suddenly and suspiciously in 1861, it became a race to the finish to complete his tomb. The Huiling was the last of the tombs to be built on the site of the Eastern Mausolea, and this one was built for the Tongzhi Emperor. Let me quote from Zhang Rong's best-selling biography of the Empress Dowager, who wrote an excellent description of the tombs of Tongzhi and Cixi. Quote, "Both mausoleum compounds were enormous and were places of serene natural beauty, in the embrace of the hills, streams, and woods. Each mausoleum had an underground chamber and an above-ground edifice that was a replica of a palace in the Forbidden City. At the front were carved marble pillars with lofty wing-shaped crowns. The most awe-inspiring feature of a mausoleum was its approach, a long, straight avenue lined with giant stone statues of elephants, lions, horses, and other big beasts on a vast area of open land. But there was no such avenue leading to Emperor Tongzhi's mausoleum. The budget would not stretch to it. Cixi had to choose between spending money on the avenue or importing hardwood for the coffin and the burial buildings. China was short of top-quality wood, and her late husband's mausoleum had to make do with wood left over from his father's tomb. Cixi, who believed in life after death, wanted the best material for her son in the next world, and she decided to sacrifice the glory of the approach. She bought from overseas the most expensive hardwood, a kind of nanmu, which was said to be so dense that it would sink rather than float in water." End quote. This hapless ruler, who only lived to the age of 18, hadn't reigned long enough to prepare for his tomb. Tongzhi's father was the Xianfeng emperor, which meant that according to the tradition begun by Yongzheng, he should have been interred at the western Qing tombs. But the Empress Dowager Cixi, who was still the main decider, insisted that since she was going to end up at the eastern tombs next to her deceased husband, the Xianfeng emperor, she wanted their son to be near them too. So back then, in 1875, well, nobody could argue with her. So the Tongzhi emperor ended up in the eastern tombs. The tomb of the Empress Dowager Cixi, just like her husband's great-great-grandson, she too liked a nice extravagant tomb. 42 years it took to build this monstrosity. Construction began in 1866 and finished in 1908, the year of her death. The site was carefully chosen for its proximity to Emperor Xianfeng's resting place. Cixi's tomb was quite grand indeed. Empress Dowager Ci'an's tomb, much less so. But the one that took the cake was the Yuling of Kangxi's profligate grandson, the Qianlong Emperor. The Yuling took decades to build, and with all we know of this particular emperor, no expense was spared. The three-chambered underground complex is entirely cut from a huge marble block and it could probably withstand a nuclear blast. So let's fast forward to the year 1928, at the tail end of the warlord era, just at the conclusion of the Northern Expedition. This is where the warlord Sun Dianying has his inglorious moment on the stage of Chinese history. If he had a patron saint or source of inspiration, it was probably Wen Tao, who I mentioned at the outset, plunderer of the Tang imperial tombs. So who was this guy? Sun Dianying? He was someone from this warlord era who epitomized all that was terrible and wretched about these men. He belonged in the larger group of warlords who had no redeeming qualities and did nothing to lessen the misery of the people who were victimized by his greed, ambition, and excesses. Sun Dianying, he was no Wu Peifu or Yan Xishan. He came from a similar mold as the dog-meat general, Zhang Zongchang. Sun, he came from nothing, dirt poor, and resorted to banditry in his teens to survive. As far as warlord history went, that's how a lot of these fellas got their start. The other thing about Sun Dianying was that he was loyal to no one. He switched sides at the drop of a hat, sometimes fighting for other warlords or for Chiang Kai-shek or against the Japanese, and when it would benefit him, for the Japanese. He always kept his options open. No scruples, no principles. He was a parasite who just fed on the meek. When he fought for the dog-meat general, as soon as he saw Zhang Zongchang going down in defeat, he went and offered his loyalties to Chiang Kai-shek. This was in May 1928. The Generalissimo, enjoying a nice high at that time. Too bad it won't last for long. Like I said, Sun, he was loyal to no one for long. In early June of 1928, he received orders from Jiang to lead his 12th Army of the 6th Corps of the National Revolutionary Army to defend the northern borders. And that's why he happened to be in the general vicinity of the eastern tombs. He was ordered to first defend the tombs from a military officer named Ma Fu-tian, one of Zhang Zuolin's gang. The old marshal had early on acquired a solid reputation for robbing royal tombs. And not personally, of course, but he had his men do the dirty work for him. Ma was up in the predominantly Manchu-speaking town of Malanyu, near to where the tombs were located. He was another bandit-turned-militarist who changed sides whenever it suited his personal interests. So with little effort, on July 2nd, 1928, he was chased out of the area by Sun Dianying's army. And once Ma Fu-tian was out of the picture, the tombs were just sitting there, begging to be plundered. Actually, having Ma Fu-tian in the area provided Sun Dianying with a nice, convenient cover story for any inquisitive minds asking why he had all these soldiers around the eastern tombs. Well, one of Sun's army commanders and chief of staff, Tan Wenjiang, was selected to organize the looting operation of the tombs. Sun, he hung back, directing the op from his car. And this was all very much premeditated. They had studied the architectural drawings and everything. And to deceive the local populace, notices had been sent out to explain away the presence of Sun Dianying's troops in such a sensitive area. They let it be known that they were there to carry out military exercises, and any local people wandering around the area were chased away. Now, mind you, according to the terms of the Youdai Qing Ba Xiang Tiao Jian, the 8 conditions for preferential treatment of the Qing dynasty, the eastern tombs were supposed to have been protected by the ROC government. And by no means were the tombs unguarded. One couldn't just walk in and steal a vase or something. There were Manchu guards always present. And not enough to fight an army, but enough to deter most grave robbers. Tan Wenjiang and Sun Dianying had mostly figured out the best way to break in. The focus was only going to be on the big two, Cixi and Qianlong. After they had ordered everyone residing in the area surrounding the mausoleum to leave, they began. Access to the tombs was blocked, and when all this preliminary stuff was taken care of, Tan Wenjiang led his soldiers in the direction of Empress Dowager Cixi to the Dingdongling. These royals and their design team predicted this kind of thing might happen, so they took precautions to make it difficult, if not impossible, for ordinary grave robbers to break in. The only way to enter this underground chamber was to use powerful explosives. And that's what Tan Wenjiang ended up ordering his men to do. They blew up an outer blue brick wall and came upon a white marble partition wall, which they promptly dismantled. They blasted and chiseled their way to the chamber containing the royal sarcophagus, surrounded by all these exquisite funerary objects. And when they beheld the riches in front of their eyes, no doubt hand-selected by the Empress Dowager herself, I'm sure more than a few soldiers started having champagne wishes and caviar dreams right then and there. Now, mind you, these bandits or soldiers, and whatever you want to call them, none of them had any advanced degrees in archaeology. So when they went in for the kill, not much care was taken in the handling of the artifacts. And as far as the cultural or historical value of many of the items in the tomb, well, they were only interested in objects made from precious metals and or pearls and gemstones. Anything else was trashed or tossed to the side. When they started working on the outer and inner coffins of the Empress Dowager, they figured, knowing this woman and her reputation for extravagance, this was where the items of greatest value would be. And later on, someone had said, upon prying open the coffin and beholding the Empress Dowager, now dead for 20 years, quote, "The old Buddha appeared to be sleeping, and her face turned black only because of the wind," end quote. All the treasures that this controversial historical figure from modern Chinese history was entombed with, everything she held dear in life that she wanted with her in the afterlife, was snatched. And this wasn't a bunch of costume jewelry either. And if you recall that memorable scene in Bernardo Bertolucci's The Last Emperor, well, right after the Empress Dowager died, a big 114-gram black pearl was placed inside her mouth. And this object had originally been presented by the King of Persia in the 20th year of the Qianlong Emperor's reign. In 1993, this black pearl that it's believed Cixi had once held in her royal mouth appeared on display at one of the priciest jewelry stores in Tokyo. Sun's men unceremoniously relieved her of this black pearl. They handled her roughly and just yanked it out, using a knife to pry her jaws open. Inside the coffin, they were objects so precious and rare, it mesmerized everyone who took part in this grisly task. And then, I kid you not, they done pulled her out of the sarcophagus and emptied the coffin of everything inside that she had been peacefully laying upon. And Cixi herself, well, she was covered in jewels and pearls, and they stripped her dead body to the point where all she was wearing was one sock and some underpants. 5 large crates were loaded with all the valuables from this Dingdongling that the Empress Dowager herself had had a hand in designing. As far as a catalog of every single item of value removed from this tomb, we don't have that. We don't know for absolute certain what the tomb raiders absconded with, but one of the men responsible for the tomb design had said that there were 12,604 large pearls, 85 rubies and sapphires, 2 emeralds, and 203 tourmalines and white jades on the brocade mattress at the bottom of the coffin alone. Over at the Yuling, the tomb of the Emperor Qianlong, a similar operation was in progress. The one who was put in charge of this operation was another one of Sun Dianying's officers named Han Dapao. He led the team that worked on this tomb, and there wasn't going to be enough time to rob all the tombs. So like I said, the only ones they went after were those most likely to offer up the highest yield. And somehow, over the 133 years since Qianlong was laid in his eternal resting place, a lot of water had seeped into the tomb. And there were 6 coffins inside that contained, besides the Qianlong Emperor's coffin, those of his concubines. You know, he's been mentioned so many times, the almighty Qianlong Emperor. Despite everything we know about him, all the history he played a role in, all the anecdotes, well, he couldn't have been treated more shabbily than on this July date in 1928. After all this time in his magnificent tomb, all that remained of this longest reigning emperor in Chinese imperial history was a skeleton. And in order to access the jewels and precious objects he was buried with, the soldiers snatched the former ruler of the Chinese Empire and just unceremoniously dumped his remains in the water and the mud along with his concubines. And anything worth stealing was taken. All of the trucks laden with all the loot returned to Sun Dianying's headquarters. In all, it reportedly took something like 30 trucks to carry away all of Sun's plunder. He allowed his officers above the rank of battalion commander to gather up whatever treasures they could steal for themselves. After they took their loot, the common soldiers were allowed to grab whatever was left over. The greatest pieces were all turned over to Sun. When it was all over, Sun Dianying ordered Tan Wenjiang to quietly make his way to Beijing, then called Beiping, and to get a room at the China Hotel. There they sought out a fence to distribute the artifacts. Tan went to one of his relatives, also surnamed Tan, who worked as a clerk at an antique shop. And this person made an introduction to a gallery once owned by a man named Huang Jun, once the most reputable antiques dealer around. And after what was surely a heck of a lot of haggling, these stolen imperial treasures were sold for filthy lucre. In our day, lovers of Chinese culture might have lined up for hours at a museum or paid good money to see these magnificent treasures. But it wasn't meant to be. They all disappeared into 100 museums and private collections, or just ended up being lost to eternity. Well, you know the old saying, 纸包不住火, paper can't wrap a fire. Soon, the truth came out, and Yan Xishan's Beiping Garrison Command caught up with Tan Wenjiang at a bathhouse one night and arrested him. The news of the plundering of the royal tombs was first discovered by Reuters, who were the first to announce this shocking story to the world. There was no small amount of public outrage, and for a while, this caper was the talk of the town in more places than China. You know, the first 50 years of the 20th century were not terribly peaceful in China. Between the fall of the Qing, Yuan Shikai's perfidy, all the tragedy, death, and suffering caused by the warlords, the shortcomings of the KMT, early Japanese aggression, and everything else looked back on in anger, even despite all that and with all the outrageous crimes perpetrated, when this news story got out, there was just a public outcry. The desecration of these tombs and the theft of these treasures, even though these people were Manchus, it really touched a nerve. There was this feeling, even after all that had transpired between 1912 and 1928, that this terrible act had gone too far. Well, maybe Sun Dianying expected this, maybe he didn't, but he had to do some serious hardcore damage control, and no expense was spared to bribe all those at the top of the Republic of China government. The last emperor of the Qing dynasty, Puyi, was heartbroken when he heard what happened. He was said to have screamed, "If I don't avenge this, I will never be a descendant of the Aixin Jueluo clan." End quote. This incident, and the failure of the ROC government to do anything about it, led to a complete break between Puyi and the nationalist government. So anyone wondering, why did the last emperor throw his lot in with the Japanese when they created Manchukuo? Well, this may have been the leading cause. I read that Puyi even named one of his wolfhounds Tan Wenjiang. With his chief of staff arrested and all this outrage coming not only from the top down, from the public, and even internationally, Sun Dianying turned up the volume on his PR campaign. The royal family of the Republic of China, I guess you could call them, well, they demanded their tribute. Just like Henry Hill had to do with Paulie and Goodfellas, Sun Dianying turned over no small amount of treasure. When Dai Li came a-knocking, Sun handed over the 2 largest vermilion beads of Emperor Qianlong, the imperial 9-dragon sword, the black night pearl pried from Cixi's royal mouth, and other utterly fantastical jade objects and priceless artifacts. All were handed over to Dai and delivered to Chiang Kai-shek, the Songs, and their spouses. And whatever didn't end up in their hands ended up getting sold to collectors. Japan's Yamanaka Chamber of Commerce also made a few substantial purchases. And when it was all over, Sun, Tan, and all the participating troops obtained about 2 tons of gold, plus 5 divisions of guns, ammunition, clothing, and other items. And this didn't include whatever baubles the officers and soldiers were able to fill their pockets with. As for Sun Dianying, nothing much has changed since then. He paid off everyone who needed to be paid off, and the whole dang thing was just swept under the rug. And he went on to fight with Feng Yuxiang and Yan Xishan in the Central Plains War against Chiang Kai-shek. And when it looked like Jiang would prevail, and with most of his troops killed in the war, Sun did the old turncoat thing again and joined up with Jiang. He fought all over North China for Jiang's allies, against Jiang's allies. His troops fought the Japanese, or if it was financially lucrative, for the Japanese. But by the mid-1930s, his troops had mostly been decimated, and he took himself out of the game. After the start of the Sino-Japanese War in 1937, Sun came out of seclusion and fought against Japan, and not surprisingly, fought also on their side. Whilst fighting for Japan and the collaborationist government led by Wang Jingwei, he ended up getting hammered by the Communists' 8th Route Army in August 1943. Sun Dianying made it out alive and lived on to fight in the Chinese Civil War on the side of the nationalists. But he got written out of the script early and ended up perishing in a communist POW camp near Handan, southern Hebei province, in 1946 or 1947. No one knows for sure. After liberation in 1949, Tan Wenjiang ended up throwing his lot in with Chairman Mao and the communists. He went on to serve as a member of the Tianjin CPPCC and as a deputy director of the Tianjin People's Park Management Office. And he died of natural causes during the Cultural Revolution, the day after Ringo's 29th birthday on July 8th, 1969, age 70. Like I mentioned, I'm not sure whatever happened to most of the treasures. I suppose a lot of the objects remain in private collections that the public will never be able to see. The owners, like Smeagol used to do with his precious, just keep these objects for their own personal viewing pleasure. Who knows? Some may be in museums or available for public viewing somewhere. Throughout history, it was so common for people to get away with murder and creating mayhem as they do today. It's been a recurring theme in world history that always leaves us wondering why evil so often triumphs over good and why so many crimes committed by people throughout history went unpunished. Okay, class dismissed earlier than usual. I had hoped to have this episode ready for you before I went on my long trip that I just returned from. I was moving around too much, and this had to wait till I got back. This here is Laszlo Montgomery signing off from Los Angeles, California. Take care, all you good-looking and erudite CHP listeners, and do consider coming back again next time for another exciting episode of the China History Podcast.